Hello, welcome. I'm Justin, and today we are continuing a little thing I did quite literally like an hour ago, which was talk about some progress that I'm making in my degrees in celebration of my school year beginning in roughly 9 hours. And instead of going to sleep, I am recording these videos because my sleep schedule has been a fucking nightmare. So, what we're going to do today, I went over in the last video my math degree progress and basically what classes I have to take to complete my math degree on time. And I'm going to do the exact same thing today, but with history. I get to maybe even talk a little bit about, because I kind of know history sometimes. So I feel like I can talk a little bit more about why I chose the class, why it was interesting, and actually my history degree specifically has a specific course that I'm taking and I'll explain it as I continue throughout the class discussions. Basically, I've done the same exact format which I did in the math video, which is I have some Wikipedia articles that are somewhat related to my classes, and I'll tell you the semester which I'm taking them, and basically why. And maybe, and I'll talk a little bit. I'll read a little bit from the wiki, or in some cases I've moved the wiki down to a part that is more relevant to the class than others. So as you can see, your first Wikipedia article that I have pulled up is the Holy Roman Empire, which is a political, or which was a political entity in Western, Central, and Southern Europe that developed during the early Middle Ages and continued until its dissolution in 1806 during the Napoleonic Wars. The exact term was not used until the 13th century, but the emperor's legitimacy always rested on the concept of translatio imperii, translatio imperii, that he held supreme power inherited from the ancient emperors of Rome. Riveting. So basically, why do I have the Holy Roman Empire pulled up? Well, I believe personally, I haven't taken the class yet, but I do think that it will be central to one of the classes that I'm taking, which is early modern European history, or just early European history. The time period, roughly 1400s, 1300s to 1800s. And so I thought, what was a unit that was completely existent during that time frame? Well, what better than, besides talking about the British Empire, we've heard enough about the British Empire. I will probably hear a fuck ton about the British Empire in the whole class. So why not discuss the Holy Roman Empire? It was also, I don't know why, it literally was the first thing that came to my mind when I was pulling up all these Wikipedia articles. I didn't think of the British Empire. I thought of the Holy Roman Empire first, which is interesting. I thought of the Habsburgs and how. So at the time I'm recording this, is a side branch and not relevant at all. But by the time I'm recording this, House of the Dragon's first episode just came out like a couple days ago, and like Matt Smith's in it. I love Matt Smith. Matt Smith's a great actor, and he plays somebody. I don't know. I didn't watch Game of Thrones, but people are talking about him a lot because he's a main character. And somebody said, because like obviously I think like in the books maybe it talks about how the Targaryens are supposed to be like really like attractive or something, and like somebody made a tweet that was like Matt Smith is was born to be a Targaryen because he's attractive in a way that doesn't completely rule out inbreeding. And then somebody in the replies like related him to the Habsburgs, and I thought, first off, the coolest, like most backhanded compliment you can think of is calling somebody attractive, but hypothetically inbred. But I digress. I think of the Habsburgs frequently, and that's why the Holy Roman Empire was the first thing I thought of, and I thought it was be interesting. And I personally really liked. I took in high school. I took AP World, which has a ban on how much European content you could have, and then I took AP Euro, which had the opposite. It only talks about Euro. And I did find reading about the Holy Roman Empire to be one of the more interesting things because, especially when you can think about it in terms of Voltaire calling it neither Roman nor holy nor an empire, um, which I thought was really interesting. I thought it was cool. I liked reading about it. I remember specifically, just to sound somewhat smart and name drop like the War of Spanish Secession, and then I remember like stuff like that, reading about the emperors and like I don't know, just cool stuff, like it's interesting. It's a very interesting fucked up. Like, it's a fucked up history kind of a thing. It's a fucked up empire. I thought it was really interesting. But that's one of the classes. I'm taking this class in the fall of this year, also known as I will go to the first class on Wednesday. And so the next that I pulled up is World War One, and I'm pretty sure you can assume why. Referred to by contemporaries as the Great War, its belligerents included much of Europe, the Russian Empire, the United States, and the Ottoman Empire, with fighting also expanding into the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia. One of the most deadliest conflicts in history. An estimated 9 million people were killed in combat, while over 5 million citizens died from military occupation, bombardment, hunger, and diseases. Millions of additional deaths resulted from genocides within the Ottoman Empire and the flu pandemic, which was exacerbated by the movement of combatants during the war. Why do I have this up? It's because I'm taking a class on World War One, which also allows me to explain the trajectory of my history degree. Basically, I can choose different paths that my history degree goes down and take classes that are more specific towards that pathway to get a little thing on my degree that says that I did something specific. Basically, I have a concentrate, like a focus. I have a focus of my degree. Like my math degree, it's math degree also. I could do that, but I chose the general focus for that one because um, and also because the math one is required. The history choosing a focus is optional, and so it if I can't fulfill this, doesn't hurt me at all. My math one is just the normal one. I was education for a minute, the probability is hard. For this one, my history degree focus is war. I've taken 2 classes on the Civil War already, the coming of the Civil War and the Civil War specifically, and I'm taking this class right here, which is the World War One, the Great War, and I'm going to be taking more classes that revolve around wars of some sort. Therefore, I will be an expert on war. But why do I take this class? I've learned a lot about World War II already through AP Euro and the AP World, even, and basically, literally just living in the United States. You learned so much about World War One in history classes, and I thought it was interesting that World War One wasn't talked about as much. And I don't know, it seemed interesting, and so I decided to take it, and also because it helps me get to that war uh, little thing on my degree that says I know war. Um, I do want to say though, one of I think it's probably like one of my least favorite books I've ever read in my life. All Quiet on the Western Front is about World War One, and so I'll say that if that is part of my required readings, I will drop the class. It's just that simple. I don't want to touch that book again. It's one of the most overrated pieces of garbage that I've ever read in my life. Now, next we have the Garifuna people. I have this one up specifically because I couldn't find a very specific thing mentioned in my class or my class syllabus um, discussing anything more broadly about the class, so I brought up one of the people that we will be focusing on. This is Central American history, and specifically more modern leaning Central American history. And I took this class because obviously not obviously, I say obviously, I've really wanted to, it's obvious to me, learn about Central American history and culture and Latin American history and culture. And I've gotten little tastes, little droppings throughout. I've learned it in AP World when we talked about the Aztecs and the Incan Empire and stuff like that. But that's not modern. I learned about some culture. I took AP Spanish, which that's also going to be a future video probably. I'm going to be talking about Spanish or something, but that's again too far ahead. Spoiler alert. I learned some culture from AP Spanish. I thought that was really interesting, but I've never been able to fully go in depth into history and culture of Latin America until this class, and I was really interested actually. And it from reading it, it seems like it's going to be a very informative class. I don't remember the readings specifically, um, but I know for a fact we're going to be focusing a ton on the just interconnectedness of the peoples that live in Latin America, such as the Garifuna, and how they connect, as well as just have a wider lens on the entire the entire area and how the history interconnects and um, how the areas is misconceived and such like that. And like I think that's really interesting to me, and I really want to take it. I'm also taking this as well as the World War One class at the same time, which is in the fall. So I'm gonna be taking 3 history classes this fall. Um, so it's gonna be a lot of writing and a lot of cramming. Okay, and so the next class, or the next class that I have up, the next Wikipedia page is of the Cold War, and specifically, I have one very particular part of the Wikipedia page underlined, and it is the Sino-Soviet split. After 1956, the Sino-Soviet alliance began to break down. Mao had defended Stalin when Khrushchev criticized him in 1956 and treated the new Soviet leader as a superficial upstart, accusing him of having lost his revolutionary edge. For his part, Khrushchev, disturbed by Mao's glib attitude towards nuclear war, referred to the Chinese leader as, quote, a lunatic on the throne. After this, Khrushchev made many desperate attempts to reconstitute the Sino-Soviet alliance, but Mao considered it useless and denied any proposal. The Chinese-Soviet animosity almost spilled out in an intra-communist propaganda war. Further on, the Soviets focused on a bitter rivalry with Mao's China for the leadership of the global communist movement. Historian Lawrence Luthi argues the Sino-Soviet split was one of the key events of the Civil War, or of the Cold War, equal and important to the construction of the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Second Vietnam War, and the Sino-American rapprochement. The split helped to determine the framework of the Second Cold War in general and influenced the course of the Second Vietnam War in particular. Now, why have I outlined that? Because I'm taking a class about China and the Cold War specifically, and that's also another tick towards my war part of my history degree. I have also always found the Cold War super interesting, particularly the Asian side of the Cold War, and like the communist involvement of China and Vietnam and Korea and all that. I tried to take a class on Vietnam in the Cold War, and are not, well, yeah, Vietnam and the Cold War, and just the Vietnam War, America in Vietnam, and such and such. And I couldn't, I just couldn't. It didn't work out like that. But I've always had it on my mind, and I saw this class as being offered. I'm going to be taking it in the spring, hopefully, and I jumped on it. I really wanted to take this class. This class seems super interesting. Just talking about, we always focus on the Cold War when we're learning it, even in history in high school. We focus it on as a two-sided equation, like a United States and a Russia or Soviet Union, like U.S. and Soviet Union. But we often we often just disregard that both sides had allies unless we're talking about NATO and Warsaw Pact. Like we don't think about the allies unless we're specifically talking about them. But it's like oh, the United States had NATO and Soviet had the Warsaw Pact. That's it. And then obviously here we have the Russia Soviet alliance with China, and you have all those other interactions between China and the United States, with in Korea and in Vietnam, and in such and such. And it's really interesting to me to kind of want to look at a lesser focused on in high school point of the Cold War, because the Cold War went on for like 50 years, and we only really try to discuss it in terms of the U.S. and the Soviet Union when there's definitely more power players in it. And I'm doing that in the spring of 23. Next class, I've selected the Wikipedia article. I couldn't even really think of one, so I just put Victoria Falls, which is a waterfall on the Zambezi River in southern Africa, which provides habitat for several unique species of plants and animals. It is located on the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, and is one of the world's largest waterfalls with a width of 1,708 meters. Since the mid-20th century, the site has been an increasingly important source of tourism. Zambia and Zimbabwe both have national parks and tourism infrastructure at the site. Research in the late 2010s found that climate change caused precipitation variability is likely to change the character of the fall. That's not good to hear. Why have I chosen Victoria Falls? Well, it's actually a class that I've just genuinely wanted to take since I heard it existed last year, but it's one of the most popular classes, and it's just talking about African environmental history. Talking specifically, focusing specifically on the history of Africa and history within Africa of how the African people and how other exploiters have used their environment. And I chose Victoria Falls because it is one of the most beautiful landmarks of Africa that I could think of. And I don't know. I thought that like this is a class purely just to be like, I don't know, I thought it was interesting. I thought it sounded pretty cool. Um, and I'm also meeting it in the spring of 23. And the next one I've decided to the Wikipedia article I chose for this one is history, because this is when we start getting into the more vague things that I have to do for my degree. Basically, where I go, we have to do a workshop. We have to basically just learn how to be a historian, and that can be in any category we want. That can be anything basically. We have to learn how to be a historian and like look at primary sources and analyze them and do X and Y and write papers, and write research papers and write articles, and just learn how to be a historian in anything. So I just chose history because I don't know what I want to do. I have a little bit. I have very little, but I have a tiny bit of variability in what I can do in history. I have much I have more wiggle room than math, but less than I would like like to have basically. Um, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with this workshop yet. I'm gonna be taking it fall of my senior year at the latest. I have to because it's a prereq to the next thing that I have up there. And if you can read the little tab, it sounds familiar because I've already talked about it twice. But basically, it's how you learn how to write papers better, how to, I think historians write in like Chicago or something stupid. So it'll be like that. Primary sources, talking about the historiography debates. Like I remember in one of my civil war classes, we discussed historiography for like probably one class. And it was like our TA led the discussion on it. And it was really interesting talking about how like even within historians, like the general history can be agreed upon, but the way that the narrative can be spun so easily by historians by just looking at very specific points of data and very specific historical events. Like we talked a lot about like the lost cause narrative, or there because there is a historiographical debate between like was not the lost cause narrative. The lost cause narrative is some bullshit and it's different. But more like, was this a doomed war from the start kind of a thing? Or like it I don't remember exactly what it was because I remember even historians of that time when it was happening changed their opinion pretty quickly. Or not pretty quickly, but have shifted the historiographical debate a little bit more. Um, I think that like that is all very crucial to being an historian, and that's what this class is for, basically, in a nutshell. And I'm really interested in it. I'm not gonna lie. So the next class, the last class, is I just have the Civil War because it is the most important class I will have to take. Is basically my thesis as an undergraduate. Um, it is you take a class in a historical subject that you are knowledgeable about. It's a very small class, and basically you just write a fucking huge paper. You write like a 30 page, like a 20-30 page paper, research paper the whole time, and you just get time to look at your primary sources. You get time to do research. You get time to discuss whatever the class is about. It's a very particular class. It's a very specific class. There's only a couple offered per historical, like, um, per historical subject. Jesus. And there's only a few offered. And again, it recommends, and it basically is like, you need to have previous experience in what this class is about if you would like to take this class and succeed. Because you're not analyzing, you're not reading some books, you're not reading textbooks, you're reading your primary sources. You're going to read, and I've chosen the Civil War, you're going to read what the governor of Georgia said in 1862 talking about the Civil War. You're going to read what they said in 1854 talking about secession. You're going to read about all of that. You're going to read the secession commissioner. You're going to read all these primary sources and write a banging 20, 30 page research paper, basically. This is the whole point. Is that we're writing long papers to be a historian. This is like intro to historian class, where we're going to get 20, 30 page paper, bare minimum, and we're going to submit it to the professor. We're going to get it published, basically. Maybe. I don't know. That's the goal. The end game is to get it published. But that's basically what this class is. It's intro to history. You're writing, you're researching primary sources, you're sifting through the archives, you're reading through the parchment scrolls, and you're gonna write a paper about it. And I've chosen the Civil War because I've already taken 2 classes strictly about the Civil War, coming to the Civil War and Civil War itself. And as well as I've taken an American economics class, which touched on the economics of the Civil War, economics of slavery, etc., etc. So I feel like I have a lot. I find it very ironic. Because because I don't fucking care. I'm gonna diverge a little bit because when I was in high school specifically, I really hated American history. I thought it was so boring because I remember my first history class was very prehistoric to, like 1500 or something. I don't remember the cutoff year. But so basically, we talked about like Egypt and Mesopotamia and Rome and all that. Then we started going through, we started talking about Aztec and the Inca, and we're talking at the same time as well. We're talking about, Britain a little bit. We're talking about Holy Roman. We're talking about Crusades. We're talking about France, etc., etc., etc. And I was okay with that. I thought that was all super interesting. I love the Aztecs. I love Mesopotamia, Mohenjo-Daro, all of the ancient stuff. And then I took AP World, which was Euro, or like no anti-Euro. It was everything that we never learned, at least I never learned in elementary or middle school. I'm talking about, again, Mohenjo-Daro, and we're talking Mesopotamia and Egypt, and we're focusing on the Byzantines, and we're focusing on the caliphates, and, the spread of Islam, and all of that fucking awesome stuff that we just didn't talk about. I thought that was so much vastly more interesting because it was different than what I learned. I had learned my whole life Abraham Lincoln. I'm learning George Washington. I'm learning Thomas Jefferson. I'm learning Franklin Roosevelt. I'm learning World War I and World War II every single time. And then I took Civil War class. And I think antebellum, because I took a push in high school as well. And I hated talking about I hated talking about like the settlement. I hated talking about the Pilgrims. I hated talking about colonial America. Colonial America I found really boring, which was really coincidental because I found the economics of colonial America fucking enthralling. But that's not the point. But that kind of is the point. Um, and then I remember I started getting interested in AP U.S. history after the Civil War was over, because the only era of American history I liked before taking Civil War classes was the Gilded Age, and then World War II onwards, because that's more modern stuff. I find the modern political intrigue very interesting. But I remember I found the Gilded Age really interesting because I found the corruption hilarious. I found it was really interesting. I loved the robber barons, and I loved reading about monopolies. Like all that stuff, pretty interesting to me. And then it kind of got boring again. And World War One happened, and I was like, World War One's kind of fine, I guess. Like, whatever. Woodrow Wilson's a dickhead. And then as we went on, the Great Depression or the Roaring Twenties, interesting, kind of. And we're talking about the 30s, where we're in a Great Depression. Like that's cringe. And then FDR, my dog, gets in the office. He takes 8 years to turn the Depression around, gets us into World War II, and we're cooking again. We're cooking. American history is kind of interesting again. And then I get to college, and I take antebellum America, and I get to take American economic history. Antebellum America was very interesting to me. It was a lot more interesting than I thought. And I was genuinely very surprised almost every time I went to class because of how interested I was in it. And it was a very pleasant surprise. Like, do not get me wrong. It was a very pleasant surprise. I was just, again, I was enthralled by the political intrigue. When we're talking about one of my papers I wrote that year was talking about Andrew Jackson. And it was specifically, I can almost remember the exact question, like the exact prompt, and it was, do you think like the age of Jackson is attempting or is a fitting name for the era of like 1824 to like 1840? And I was like, no, no, I don't actually. Um, I wrote I think it was because it was a smaller paper and we had another paper to write alongside of it. I think our max pages was like 6. And I wrote all 6 pages full to the bottom, basically saying, no, it shouldn't be the age of Jackson. Other people, this person, this person, this person, was just as important in that time frame. And it got graded well. And I remember one of the exact grading notes was literally just like, I respect your boldness for saying Age of Jackson is cringe. And I was like, and then I also got like a B on that, or like I got like a B plus on the whole project. And I was like, dude, come on, if you expect the boldness, come on. But like, I was enthralled by the political intrigue, the corrupt bargain, talking about Henry Clay running for president like 8 fucking times. Andrew Jackson, the fact that this was one of the people in the papers, Martin Van Buren was running everything behind the scenes and gets no hate or love. He just gets known as being a mid president who had a panic in the middle of his presidency, but like he he engineered the two-party system. It was riveting to me to read that. It like I remember we got a textbook and I was actually intrigued and was actually reading it like not for enjoyment, never for enjoyment. But when I was reading it, I wasn't like bored. I was like, "Oh shit, like this is happening. This is actively like this is getting interesting. This is history I didn't know." Like it's the same intrigue that I get when I like read actual books, like the once in a lifetime chance that I do. Like I'm like, oh, I don't know what happens next. Like I don't know why like Martin Van Buren's cooking up behind the scenes in 1820s New York. I don't know what's gonna happen. I thought that was really interesting, and then I took Civil War class. Civil War class, we went like month by month through the Civil War, and while it was not the class I was expecting, I was very intrigued by Reconstruction politics. I wanted a class to be about Reconstruction politics and how that happened. And specifically, I would have liked to see the culmination in not or the corrupt bargain like 2.0 basically between Hayes and the House, and I would have loved to see that. I would love to see Grant strong arming Reconstruction and all of that. But I got a little bit of that. We talked about a little bit of Reconstruction through Johnson and how Johnson and Grant had his beef and all that. But like we mostly spent time talking about Civil War, and like that was actually interesting too because there was a lot of political intrigue during that time as well. But less interesting. But to get all of that aside, that was a very long tangent just to say that I didn't like American history and that I took college level courses on it, which were more specific, more specified, and I really enjoyed them. And that's why I've taken more Civil War classes than I should have. And that's why I'm qualified to take a endgame historical Civil War class, which I'll probably be what I'm going to do my spring semester of my 4th year of college, spring of 2024. I can hear a train coming, and I don't want to just pause the recording until it's done, so I'm going to end it right here. This is my history degree. I'm going to spend the next 2 years doing this type of history, and it's going to be really interesting, and I'll probably want to share a lot more of it, like in those Today We Learns. I've beefed up my computer a lot to the point where I can definitely make higher quality content sometimes if I want to, which I might do. I might. With me being a double major and also fucking really lazy, there's no guarantees. But I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about history and ramble about my likes for a little bit. And if you don't mind me, I'm gonna go to sleep soon because I do have class in the morning, which sucks to say out loud actually. Um, Goodbye.